Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. On January 10th, when Tyre Nichols died after being beaten 3 days earlier by Memphis police, eyebrows were raised over yet another black man dying at the hands of police. When the graphic heart-to-stomach video of the beating was released a little more than a week ago, America was inflamed over the 5 cops who were fired and with subsequent revelations about faulty police reports and about more cops who are being investigated. And because the first 5 cops fired were also black, a complex dialogue is raging about race, policing, and how to change the trajectory of what is an ongoing struggle. In our studio this evening is a Bronx woman who is a communication expert and conflict resolution strategist, a diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator, speaker, and leadership coach. She is the author of the bestseller, Closing Conflict for Leaders, How to Be a Bold Leader and Develop a, if you excuse the expression, kick-ass, high-functioning, happy team, and the creator also of the sold-out group on the matter of race. Welcome back to Bronx Talk, Dr. Maureen Lynne Hurdle.
Hello, thank you.
Nice to have you with us. We're going to do something a little different today. We have a lot to talk with you about. But first, I want to show you and the people of the Bronx an interview I did earlier today with John Jay College of Criminal Justice Professor Greg Donaldson, who teaches NYPD officers at the executive level and has written extensively on gang violence in New York City. We talked in depth about policing and the killing of Tyre Nichols. Let's take a look. Thank you for joining us, Professor Donaldson. We all saw the video. Is there any way to explain what could have motivated not 1 or 2, but 5 police officers to misbehave in such an egregious way?
Well, speculation in these instances is dangerous, and everybody's doing it because we don't know all the facts right now. But the video is so egregious that it calls for people to try to explain it at this point. And there are no explanations for what happened. It's inexplicable. A lot of things about this are inexplicable. The level of agitation that the police officers displayed on the initial car stop was inexplicable. I've ridden with these kinds of units to write books and to write articles, and I was privileged by the NYPD to be in the backseat of a patrol car for over a year and ride on all kinds of incidents similar to, not similar to this, but in which police crossed the line or did not cross the line. I wrote a book called The Ville. That's why I teach at John Jay. I've never seen officers act this way initially. I've seen them doing things that were excessive force, but I've never seen them drag the person out of the car immediately. So that's inexplicable. The rest of the video also in its inhumanity is inexplicable, except if you look at the history of these kinds of units, you look at the street crime unit in New York City, Ramparts in LA, you look at these kinds of units, they're spawned out of public terror against crime, spikes in crime, like the 90s spawned the street crime unit in New York, et cetera. And they're given marching orders that are, if not explicitly, then implicitly, to do whatever it takes to take back the streets. And those kinds of orders often lead to abuses. And we saw that and more here.
It's rather incredible because they came out of their vehicle in a heightened state of agitation before they even, said anything to Tyre Nichols. So the Memphis Scorpion unit was designed out of an escalated urgency to fight crime. I think they said specifically to restore peace in our neighborhoods. They talked about reckless drivers. The police chief told her team officers were to focus less on writing tickets and more on an all-out strategy to seize cars. I mean, that just creates this heightened sense of tension amongst people being served, and also, of course, through the police officers. You mentioned the street crimes unit. 1994, Mayor Giuliani and Police Commissioner Bratton ordered their elite unit to start confiscating illegal weapons. And then, of course, we had Amadou Diallo, we had Patrick Dorismond. I mean, the list, unfortunately, goes on and on. 2 of these officers had been disciplined in the past for failing to file proper reports after using physical force. At what point should police higher up say, you know what, you did this once, you could do it again, and take protective action? And then you struggle with the union, of course, because you can't start taking people off the streets if they have a job and maybe they made one mistake. But at what point should the police administration step in and say, you can't be on the streets anymore?
Okay, before I answer that, I just want to add something about how these units work. And
Sure.
so they talk about quality of life, and the stop and frisk was instituted by Bratton. And really, what they're doing is they're not worried about quality of life. They're not worried about people drinking in public or urinating in the streets. They're trying to get in people's pockets to find guns. They say at the meetings, the police say, "Who did you touch? Did you touch the right people?" They're stopping cars and looking for guns. Quite simply, they're confiscating cars. They don't want cars, they want the guns. And the guns bring down the crime, is the theory. And there's some truth to that. So that's what they're doing. That's what they did with stop and frisk. That's what they're doing with the anti-crime units of the past. Now Adams has renamed them to a neighborhood watch or neighborhood police or something. But the same thing. They're going to try to get the guys they think have the guns and search them. And that's what these units do.
Can Mayor Adams dream of doing this? And he says we're going to do it the right way and not infringe on people's civil rights. Can that be done, or is this aggressive policing by its nature going to cause and get into these kinds of problems?
I think the latter is the.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear.
I wrote an article in the Daily News called "Old Wine, New Bottles," because what happens is these officers are rewarded, promoted, lined up for interviews with the detective squad based on what? How many guns they get. The kudos, the promotions, etc., are lined up on how many guns they get. So if that's your incentive, then you're going to start getting closer and closer and edging to the line. Of course, you can do it in a more community-friendly way, but eventually it leads to abuses.
Now, where are we at as far as training? I mean, is that what the issue is, or is the issue even further back at the hiring end that maybe they're bringing in the wrong people?
I would say that no, that it's got to do with training. It's got to do with retraining. I think that they train these officers in a very cursory way. You'll notice the lack of training in this event. It had to do with they didn't detain him properly. He escaped and ran away. Their cuffing procedure, the strategy was somebody has to take control. Someone has to be a quarterback of the situation. And no one did. No one took control in that situation. And it led to chaos. So it's training, retraining, and also the aim and the goal of the department. The goal can't be tough guys will stop bad guys. That is the wrong message. It's community service. You're there to solve problems. You're there to make life better for the people that are there. And so it can't be this single-minded approach to catch the bad guys and do the bad guys in.
I know a number of New York City police officers. They feel like they're targeted. They feel like they're abandoned. They have very difficult jobs. I mean, when something goes wrong, I'm out of the way, asking the police to take care of the situation. And these incidents that draw people to protest against that the people that the public pays to protect them sets up a very, very bad dynamic.
Yes.
What do we say on their behalf? That because obviously many police officers, the wide majority of them are excellent police officers, and I can't talk about Memphis. I can tell you about the NYPD. A word of sympathy for good cops who now are like, wait a minute, I'm doing the right thing. I work in the most difficult situations in New York City, and now everybody's yelling at me for something I personally didn't
You're
do.
absolutely right. That kind of across the board condemnation is misguided and counterproductive. We need to deal with policies. We need to deal with training. We need to deal with the kinds of substantive issues about how protected police are once they're charged. There's a lot of times they have these special protections against self-incrimination, et cetera. There has to be some adjustment in those things so there's more accountability. But what you said about good police officers is absolutely amazing. There's nothing better than a good cop, and there's nothing worse than a bad one. And there's so many good police officers, and we express our gratitude for the jobs that they do. You know that when they get a call and they're in a pursuit, running through the night, trying to catch somebody, and at the end of that pursuit, they have to fight with someone.
And now, if I can just interject, now the potential is that anybody could have a pistol in their pocket. I mean, and that, of course, heightens the tension and the fear that, Amadou Diallo held up his wallet and that street crimes unit didn't see it that way. And we had obviously a major incident.
Right.
Do you see the ultimate solution through social service solutions? Do you see that really we need to do better job giving kids productive activities? Or because many people say, hey, look, like I think Rudy Giuliani said, midnight basketball doesn't work. I personally disagree. Do you see that as like an ultimate way of helping to ramp down the tension in our street?
Absolutely. Social justice, equality. Nobody wants to be a drug dealer. Being a drug dealer is a short life.
Yes.
And we've done studies at John Jay of drug dealers. They don't get fabulously wealthy on that level. They leave. They go to prison. They get shot. They don't know. They lease cars. They don't own homes. They don't own businesses. It's not a life anybody wants. You give somebody an alternative and a good job, and you'll have much less of that. And then you adjust how you see police officers. The idea that you see police officers as heroes that are going to save you from a rising tide of uncontrollable violence is the warrior message is wrong. That has to be changed. We have to recruit people that are there to make people's lives better. And it's your best weapon is your communication skills. It's not your gun. It's a different approach to policing. And this is not just my idea. This is widespread. This
Sure.
is what's going on. When the warrior mentality, heroes against villains, doesn't work.
Let's just, before we run out of time, we're with Professor Greg Donaldson from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2021, passed in the House, still sitting, waiting to be passed, lowers criminal intent standard to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct, limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability, grants administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice in pattern or practice investigations. Do you see this kind of legislation as being helpful, or does it muddy the waters? And certainly the police unions are fighting back against qualified immunity, and that's become a political issue. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to see. A lot of these things sometimes have unforeseen consequences, collateral consequences that you don't foresee at first. But I think moving in the direction of a police accountability is the good way to go. And I would like to see how these things work out. It's not going to be where people are not out to prosecute police officers who are in good intent doing the job and making split-second decisions and trying to Monday morning quarterback them. That is not the intent of progressive police reform. It's to make police officers accountable who are crossing the line with impunity.
I do think that the blue wall of silence plays as well, because then when something like this happens, you don't see an immediate reaction or a truthful, like we saw in Memphis, a truthful response from the police leadership, because they're like afraid to get into it. But I think the people at those levels have to be strong and say, you know what, this was not right. This doesn't represent us. Let's take a very close look. We don't necessarily get that. I just want to conclude with this. I mean, the list is so long. I've already mentioned Amadou Diallo, Patrick Doris, Mondonte Wright, Eric Garner, George Floyd. It's too sad to be believed. Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown. Are we, each time something like this happens, and I know we do programs on it, everybody says, well, now we're going to stop it. Are we ready finally to get our arms around this, to do the things that you've recommended? Is the police industry ready, the criminal justice industry ready to say, you know what, we got a problem here? Or do you think, unfortunately, it's going to perpetuate? What a sad thing to ask.
I think there's a potential that this could be an impetus for some real change like the George Floyd situation was. That's why the over-the-top protests that engage in violence themselves distract from that message. So for instance, if we're going to talk about training now, training that would have officers who are in a pursuit learn how to control the adrenaline, learn that it is not us and them, that the humanity of the person who is being arrested is extremely important. If we could train that and then retrain it, have them come in after a couple of years to go over this again, and then we can send a message that anybody who crosses that violates those principles will be prosecuted. I think that can be real progress. It's an opportunity, and we should see it that way. We have to keep up the message.
An opportunity. I think that's a great way to conclude this conversation. Professor Greg Donaldson from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, thank you for your time. And your expertise is much appreciated during situations like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I should mention that we recorded this, I said earlier today. It is February 2nd on Thursday. This will not air till the 6th, so just so you can get your timing straight. Dr. Lynne, very interesting interview.
Yeah.
The one aspect which I saved for you, this was not a case, as it has been on so many others, of white police officers beating on black people. It was, in plain language, a black-on-black incident. Was race a factor in this? Many people say, well, they were black, so race was not a factor. How do you explain it?
Yeah, absolutely a factor.
It was a factor.
It was a factor. I infuriate people because, for the most part, they say, why do black people in particular say everything is about race? Because everything is, because we grow up in a system of systemic racism that teaches us black people are criminals, or the face of criminality, right? And so when you look at the fact that black officers, they couldn't see themselves in him, I don't know who had sons, they couldn't see sons, anybody that they know and love, like they didn't see the humanity of Tyre Nichols. And so part of that, a big part of that, comes from how we are taught to see black people. And for the most part, we are, not even for the most part, we're taught to see them as less than human, certainly less valuable than white lives in the system that we grew up in.
And so in the training of a police officer, and we certainly don't know specifically how the Memphis police were trained, but one of the most striking things, and while we were watching, you reacted and I reacted the same way when he reminded us that Tyre Nichols, they said that he was driving erratically. That wasn't even the case. Right. For whatever reason, something, and this is all, we suspect, something inside of them said, let's beat on this guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. And what you're saying is they perceived Tyre as being, somebody who potentially was a criminal, or
absolutely less than human, less than worthy of being able to have a conversation with, right? To, as he said, right, to be able to say, hey, brother, and I'm saying that because as black people, we do get to that place of being able to talk to each other in a way like, okay, we're kind of familiar, right? So, hey, brother, listen, let me tell you why we stopped you, right? Or you seemed afraid. There's a lot of us, right. We get that. Like all of those things, nothing like that happened. Even if you thought something was in his car, if you
or
really
he was
thought
leaving and he might have been drunk. I mean, it could be any reason. Yeah.
Just the sheer numbers alone, right? You should be able to know. Look, we got the sheer numbers. We can handle this. But the fact that he never even got a chance to be listened to. I just want to make it home. Calling for his mother, like all of those things that
and
never got
never
through.
Registered
That's
to
right. 5
police. It is remarkable. So much has been written about it, and I pulled out this quote. The head of a Los Angeles nonprofit formed after the Rodney King beating in 1991 said this after watching the Tyre Nichols beating. He said, it's not racism driving this. He called it culturism. It's culturalism. Do you see that? I guess police
I don't know
culture.
You're talking. Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, what is culturalism? Right.
Well,
okay. So you're talking about. I
he's
say
talking
it's.
about it.
Oh, okay. It's the combination of the two coming together, but it absolutely is about racism. I think that people very much make the mistake that when we're talking about something like that happens between people of the same race, that has no relationship to racism. But again, if you think about how we are taught, if you think about media images constantly flooding us, the message is very clear that you look at Black people and you're supposed to think criminal or certainly suspicious, not trustworthy, right? Even when your job is to protect people in a unit and in a neighborhood where there's high crime, I agree that you need to have relationships with people. Yes, there are people that are doing dangerous things out there. Yes, there are more people with guns, perhaps, that are that may be riding around with them. But everybody isn't like that, and there have to be signs and signals to you as an officer, right? There have to be signs and signals that, okay, let's do our best to get through in a conversation, keeping ourselves safe. But that was not that.
And that gets back to what Professor Donaldson said about training. We have one more quote, which came from Ben Crump, who's the lawyer for Tyre Nichols' family. You have to talk about this institutionalized police culture that has this unwritten law. You can engage in excessive use of force against Black and brown people. I guess this reflects what you're talking about.
Yeah, because historically that's what has always happened, right? That Black and brown people historically have been engaged with by force, right? And it goes all the way back. People don't want to talk about slavery, but I'm going back there because that's a foundation on which this was set, and it has not changed. If you really know history, which most people don't, and seriously, we're living in a time where they don't want to teach it, right?
Well, yeah, that's another. That'll be the next show. Well, we're definitely going to undertake that.
Yeah.
But you don't learn history.
So you don't understand that historically we have never, as Black and brown people, lived in a time where we were not living in terror. Never. And that includes now.
I'm sorry you said that, and I had to take a deep breath. You've done a lot of work on this. You've done the last forum you had on a matter of race. So in a way, I opened the show and said, well, how are we going to solve this? I asked the professor the same thing. How do you see a movement? Is this about protests? Where are we at to figure out how to make this change? And certainly you can talk about the work that you do, which I think is revolutionary, it's innovative, it takes a real no-holds-barred look at the issues you just brought up. But let's just talk about how you see solutions.
Yeah, I see solutions. And the first solution is we've got to own that this is a part of our history and our foundation, that we live in a system.
We meaning Black people
all
Americans?
All Americans. We've got to own this,
Start
right?
here in
And
America.
that's difficult, I recognize, because it's not taught, it's not presented, it's not talked about, particularly by white people, which the system definitely favors, right? The system is, white people are what considered the norm, right? And I say that without any harm. That's what the system teaches us. That's
Again,
who we are.
The decision by the College Board and AP courses on African American history is, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but the fact that we even call it African American history, right? It's American history.
It's a segment of American history, of course.
It's American history. And so we segment out all of these different groups as not part of history, right? But they are. So learning about our history, learning the foundation of anti-Blackness that's in this American culture, that is a part of our history, and being able to have the real discussions about that. And so when you ask, well, what happened here, and race is not a part of the discussion, that becomes a problem. When race can be a part of the discussion so that people can really look at how it factors in, to what's going on and what has happened, then we start making some inroads there. The other thing that I do is I recognize that white people don't have a forum where they can come together and learn about and talk about racism in a way where they're able to feel like, hey, I can ask these questions, I can find out what I don't know about racism, I can find out how some of the behaviors I have continue to keep racism going, even unintentionally.
Before we run out of time, to me, that's the innovative part of what you have done. And the last one, which was sold out, was the forum that you did for white people to talk, as opposed to getting black folks together.
That's right.
It was for white folks. I want to just talk, because you have been, I call her the conflict closer. A lot of people do that as well. Let's just talk about the nature of conflict, even outside of the notion of race. This was a conflict. I mean, I'm tempted to, I know that you have two boys, two wonderful young men, what you might have told them about being stopped. But you have a book called Closing Conflict for Leaders, How to Be a Bold Leader and Develop I said it earlier, a kick-ass, high-functioning, happy team. Talk about, I guess, the notion of leadership, man. What do they need to know about resolving these conflicts, racial or otherwise?
Leadership is about communication. It's really about being able to take on everyday communication all the way up to the courageous and difficult conversations. So as leaders, we need to be talking about the role that racism plays in everyday life. We need to be talking, raising children, right? In our group on the matter of race, one of the biggest things is parents wanting to raise children who can be in friendships with their friends of color and be able to have a conversation about racism, because that's not something that's happening, even as nice as the children are.
You know, I'm just going to conclude with this. We're friends outside of this TV studio. We live in the same building. And so I know her kids well. She knows me and my family well. My parents never had to talk to me about what happens if you get stopped by the police.
Right.
I mean, they would always just remind me to be polite and, you know, deal with it. But I'm assuming you had conversations with your two young men.
And my two young men also were raised in a household of communication skills and conflict resolution. So they've got that mindset first, but of course they also are afraid based on the history, right? And so, yeah, we had that conversation.
You're going to do on the matter of race again?
We are starting on the matter of race, opening up for folks to be able to be a part of a 6-month journey for level 1.
Beginning when, do we know?
Beginning at the end of this month, the end
there
of
you go.
Black History Month.
Dr. Lynne Maureen Hurdle, the conflict closer, call her anything you want, call her my friend, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
And thanks to Professor Donaldson, thanks to our producer, Rebecca Hemick, and our director, Nick Marrero. Also, thanks to the cast of thousands who are here working with us in the studio. Next week, we go to Van Cortlandt Park to talk about the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook and the first ever Van Cortlandt Trail Run, which is coming up. Nice things. We'll see you then. Good night.